I want to just give a couple of just brief principles for gospel centered homes that I think will be helpful. They've been helpful to me. And then hopefully, you'll be able to see the power in these little things and then say, okay, my hope is that I like practicality, right? That there's something you can actually do. I like being inspired, but I'm also like, tell me what to do. So that's my hope today is to some inspiration and then some practicality. What can we do? I want to start with a thought from President Monson. He said, our greatest opportunities to demonstrate our love will be within the walls of our own homes. It's not in the chapel. The greatest opportunity to demonstrate our love is not in the Relief Society room or in, at work. It's within the walls of your own home. That's your greatest opportunity for love. Love should be the very heart of family life. And yet sometimes it is not. There can be too much impatience. Raise your hand if there's too much impatience. Don't look at the person in your family that causes too much impatience. Just kind of put your hand up. Yeah, there's some impatience in our house. Too much arguing. Is there ever any arguing in your house? I don't even know what that looks like. Our kids haven't argued in the last 10 minutes. Too many fights. Are there any fights in your house? Anybody of you have fights in your house? And too many tears. Anybody ever have tears in their house, right? There can be too much impatience, too much arguing, too many fights, and too many tears. So he says this. He says, may we begin now, this very day, and this Sabbath evening right now that we're having is the perfect time to express love to our family. So if you're sitting by a member of your family right now, just look at them and say, I love you. Just go ahead and say, maybe you've never said it before. Turn to your family and say, I love you. Now, my hope, what to do is not what I want to do is not just say, okay, let's just say the words I love you, but let's show our family how much we love them. That doesn't mean we're not going to have that arguing or that impatience, right? That happens when human beings are close together for a long time, especially during quarantine. Those things are going to happen, but we can forgive, we can apologize, and we can do little things to show our family that we love them. In fact, I want to teach this principle with a painting. The most valuable painting in the United States is in New York City. It's in the Met, and it's called Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. Now, I read an article on Starry Night. It's worth 165 million. That's almost as much as my house is worth. So if you there, I read an article on Starry Night that if you look really closely at it, you can start to see the individual brushstrokes on it. Well, there was an art student who wanted to count the brushstrokes on Starry Night. So she took a replica, not the original, luckily, and started to cut it up into pieces, and then started to realize that there was more brushstrokes than she thought there was to this masterpiece. She started to see that some of the brushstrokes were covered almost completely by other brushstrokes, and that they were small, and there were not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of brushstrokes. Now, my question for you, as you look at this little piece of Starry Night, one of these little pieces that she cut out, which brushstroke was it that made it a masterpiece? Which brushstroke was it that made it worth $165 million? Right? Are you saying, oh, I can find it? Which one is it on here? The answer is none of them. None of them individually or in isolation looks very impressive, right? You wouldn't pay $165 million for one of those individual brushstrokes. But when you put them all together, go back to the full thing there, Wit. If you look at them all together, you can see the masterpiece that it creates. So what a masterpiece is in art, at least in this case, is just a lot, one after another of tiny little brushstrokes that eventually create something absolutely beautiful. Well, I want to show you a quote from Elder Bednar. So let's jump forward to that one that you had there, Wit. This quote from Elder Bednar says, in my office is a beautiful painting of a wheat field. The painting is a vast collection of individual brushstrokes, none of which in isolation is very interesting or impressive, but they work together to create a captivating and beautiful painting. Now, here's the lesson he says for our gospel homes, or having a gospel centered home. No one event may appear to be very impressive or memorable, but just as the yellow and gold and brown strokes of paint complement each other and produce an impressive masterpiece, so our consistency in doing seemingly small things can lead to significant spiritual results. I like this quote because what it can show us is that sometimes we think, oh, we've got to do something more. We've got to do something bigger. We've got to do something different. But look what he's saying here is we're doing these small things. We are reading our scriptures together. We're having family prayer. We are eating meals together. And they're all very small. And there's probably not a single event. There's probably not a single event in any family that's the one. That's the family home evening that changed it all, right? Or that's the family dinner that made it, we all went from terrible people to, wow, now we're all, celestial beings. What happens is it's the combination of all these little things over and over and over and over and over, where the total of them all, the sum of them all, creates this beautiful masterpiece. So my hope is that you keep doing the small things. We keep having family prayer. We keep doing come follow me studies, right? You might want to get the jump our Turtle House app for that. That's really helpful. You keep doing all these tiny little small things, knowing that none of them is going to be the life-changing moment, this earth-shattering moment. You might have little, perfect moments here and there, but really what they're going to be is all individually, they're not all going to be very impressive on their own. But what happens is over and over and over and over and over, eventually it creates a masterpiece. I don't think at this fireside we need to go over, hey, you need to have family prayer. Hey, you need to have scripture study. Hey, you're doing those things. You need to have, you need to be attending church. You need to be having family recreation time together, go out and have fun. You're doing all these things, just keep doing them and realize that even though not one of them is going to, that you feel like, wow, that made a huge difference. As Matt said, people are throwing things at each other. Sometimes our family come follow me time is a total of 2 minutes because, people are bouncing off the walls or someone crying, right? He's breathing my air. You're just like, I can't do this, right? And we just try to keep it positive, do whatever we can to keep it positive. Like, okay, let's just have a positive experience, even if it's only 30 seconds, and realize that that's a brushstroke. And that's okay. It's a brushstroke. It doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to change lives. We're adding another brushstroke. And over and over and over, those things create a significant difference. As you do these things, as you do these brushstrokes, I wanted to maybe include one piece that I think we can fall into a trap as we're doing these little things that we can kind of spoil our painting if we're not careful. And I think one of the most important principles is learning the difference between moral authority and formal authority. There's a book called The Anatomy of Peace, written by another friend of mine. I have a lot of friends, apparently, where he said the best leaders are those whom people want to follow. That's moral authority, right? People want to follow you. Formal authority is I do what you say because I have to, right? Because you could make my life miserable. So I do what you say because, here's my kids and they have to do it because I have formal authority. Moral authority is they do it. I ask them to because they want to. Wait, sorry, I jumped ahead. Go back one more there. So do you see in moral authority, do you have anybody in your life who you do what they ask because you want to? Think of the people you do what they ask because you want to do it. Now think of the people in your life who have formal authority. You do what they ask because you have to. How did the people with formal authority get that formal authority? Well, it's usually just given to them. They're named, right? Some people I talk to and they're like, well, there's nobody with formal authority over me. Yeah, there is. Try the police department, right? When the lights are flashing behind you, you don't go, yay, I'm excited to pull over. I want to pull over. I got chosen. No, you have to pull over because if you don't, they have formal authority over you, right? Maybe you have a boss or a parent who has formal authority. You do what they say because you have to. Now, what we want as parents is moral authority. We want our children to do what we ask because they want to, because we've earned that in their lives. Now, let's go to this next quote from the book. It says, the best leaders, and we'll say parents, are those whom children want to follow. We have a different word for parents who others follow only because of force or need. We call them tyrant. When I talk to parents across the country, I'll say, when did you become a tyrant? Was that your goal? Were you hoping one day when you got married, you're hoping, oh, let's have little humans so we can be tyrants and have them cry when we put them to bed, right? How can I become a tyrant in my life? No one wants to become a tyrant, yet sometimes we become tyrants. How did that happen? How did we become tyrants? I think we get tired. I think we realize that formal authority works best, right? You do what I say because you have to. The other day I was doing the dishes and it was a big pile of dishes. And I looked over and there's my daughter and she's on her phone and she's on the couch. And I said, do you want to help me with the dishes? Moral authority. Do you want to help me with the dishes? And she said, now, what I should have thought is, why not? Why doesn't she want to help me? If it was her best friend, she'd help. If it was her mother, she'd help. Why does she not want to help me? But instead of thinking about moral authority, where did I go? Formal authority. I said, new rule. How many of you have parents who make new rules on the spot? I made a new rule. It's a great job as parents. I said, she who does not help with the dishes does not keep her phone. Now, do you want to help me do the dishes? And she said, yeah. She didn't do it with as much happiness and gusto as I'd hoped, but she came over and helped me with the dishes. I used my formal authority. What happens if I use my formal authority too much? What happens? Let me share with you a story. This is from Elder Ballard, President Ballard. He said, please remember the experience of a friend of mine. He had never owned a horse in his life until he married a wonderful woman who loves horses. Wanting to impress his new bride, he announced one evening he was going to go to pasture to teach a colt how to be led. Those of you who work with horses, this is easy, right? He weighed more than the colt. He knew more than the colt. He assumed all he would need to do was pull on the lead rope. Sooner or later, the colt's going to follow. He was confident this process would be short and simple. This reminds me of people who talk about parenting who have never been parents. Do you remember that when you were 18 and you're like, my kids and I, we're going to be best friends. And yeah, sure you are. All right. The next part of the story, he says he attached the lead rope to the halter, got in front of the colt and pulled. What do you think the colt did? And when the man pulled on the rope, the colt resisted. So my friend pulled harder and the colt planted his legs more firmly. So he really pulled and the colt fell over. This process was repeated several times until my friend made this assessment. In just 4 or 5 minutes, he had successfully taught the colt to fall over. All he had to do was get in front of the colt, pick up the rope, and it would fall over. Over it would go. Now, here's the lesson, he says. He says his wife, watching this process, finally suggested that instead of getting in front of the colt and pulling, he might try wrapping the rope all around the colt and simply walking alongside. To my friend's chagrin, it worked. Now, this lesson for all parents, there seems to be something inside each of us, each child, that resists being told or pushed or pulled. So as we're doing these little things, we should watch out for telling people what to do and pushing them and pulling them. But if a parent puts an arm around a child, if someone puts an arm around us and walks alongside us, we are likely to follow. This idea of forcing our children to do these little things, to do these right things, can actually backfire in a pretty big way. When we push too hard, when we use our formal authority too much, we haven't earned moral authority, right? By being a kind and gentle and caring parent. If we don't earn that moral authority, we're going to end up fostering something we don't want. This is from Elder Johnson of the 70. He says, control, force, manipulation, these things can produce compliance, but they won't produce conversion. Can I say that again? Control, forcing someone to do something, manipulating them, they'll produce compliance. Your children will do these little gospel things that you want them to do, but it won't promote conversion. Unrighteous dominion, that's what control, force, and manipulation, that's what they are, doesn't yield real spiritual growth, because that only comes when a child chooses to do what is right. If you choose for them and force them into it, not when he or she is forced or coerced into some behavior. And I'll add, I think when you force your children to take part in gospel things with that control and that manipulation, you'll actually foster the very things you don't want: resentment and rebellion. Often children will rebel against the one thing their parents seemingly love most, and that is God and the church. So as we are going about doing our little brushstrokes, right? Doing our little brushstrokes, we've got to be very careful not to use force or manipulation or coercion to try to get our children to, you must do this, right? Now, there can be certain rules in the house, and you can say, hey, in our house, this is how we do things. And we set up, traditions and schedules and things. But at the same time, you have your agency, you have your choice. And it's okay to create rules in a non-emotional setting before things get emotional, not creating new rules on the spot, but in a non-emotional setting, we create, boundaries. And then we hold to those boundaries that we all helped create in an unemotional setting. When things do get emotional and things get difficult, we hold to the boundary that we created long ago. One of my favorite quotes is from the man I don't know if you know the first person in America to make over $1 million a year. His name is Charles Schwab. You've probably heard that name before. And he said something I love. He said, I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among my people the greatest asset I possess. So he said his number one asset is creating enthusiasm among his people. He said the way to develop the best that is in a person is by appreciation and encouragement. There is nothing else that so kills the ambition of a person as criticism from superiors. Now, think about this as a parent. I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among my children the greatest asset I possess. So, excitement and fun and, happiness, right? That's my asset as being a parent. The way to develop the best that is in a child is through appreciation and encouragement. There is nothing that so kills the ambitions of a child as criticism from their parents. I wanted to finish my talk today with a story. I grew up in southern Utah, the Red Cliffs of southern Utah, down by St. George. And I don't think I've told this story on a fireside before. I'm actually pretty careful in telling this story because it's a very personal story for me and something that really had impact on me. But I wanted to share it tonight. When I saw the theme, I wanted to share it with you. So this is where I grew up. And when I was a kid, those cliffs were fun. We would play who can roll the rock off the cliff and get closest to the cars without hitting them, right? We would play all sorts of games as kids. But as a dad, those cliffs are dangerous. So I had a dream one. I was up on those cliffs, those red cliffs, but I was a dad and my daughter was with me and she was just 3 or 4 years old at the time. And I had told her name's Madeline. I said, Maddie, you need to get away from those cliffs, right? And she, being funny and her brain's not fully developed, she walked towards the cliffs because she thought it'd be fun to kind of tease her dad. So she walked towards the cliffs, and I had to use my dad voice. Does your dad have a dad voice? Right? I'd use my formal authority. I was, hey, hey, stop where you are. Right? Does your mom have a dad voice? Same voice. So she, turned her back to the cliff and started backing towards them, just teasing me, thinking she's being funny. She doesn't realize what kind of danger she's in. As in with most children, they don't have a fully developed brain. They don't know. They don't realize what kind of danger they're in. And so I said to her, "Hey, Maddie, stop where you are. I'm going to come get you." And so I took a step towards her, and she took a step, smiling. And I said, "No, no, 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 don't move, okay? Don't move. I'm getting nervous. Don't move." And I took another step towards her, and she took another step back. Now she's getting dangerously close to the cliff, and I'm getting nervous. And I said, "Maddie, do not move a muscle. I'm coming over to pick you up." And I took a step towards her, and she took another step back. And every time I tried to force her not to move, she would move. And now she's within, a foot or two from the edge of this cliff. Now, if I had known it was a dream, I would have ran toward her, grabbed her, and flown to Disneyland. But I thought this was real, right? So I'm panicking. I don't know what to do. And she's on the edge. And I know, well, in my mind, I knew what I had to do. It came to me. I could do what I wanted to do, which is go get her, or I could do something entirely against my nature and I could take a step back. But I knew if I took a step back and she took a step back, that was it. And it must have been a dream because I did the right thing. And I took a step backwards and she kind of looks confused and took a step towards me. Now, my initial instinct was, okay, she took a step towards me. Let me go get her. And I was like, no, 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 no. Don't do it. Don't do it. Take another step back. So I took another step back and she took another step towards me. And again, my initial instinct kicked in. Go grab her. No, don't. So I took another step back and she took another step away from the cliff towards me. And I thought, what am I doing? Why don't I just get her away from this cliff? So I turned around and ran and she, laughing, followed after me. Well, then I woke up. I woke up and thought, woo. And I remember telling my wife about this dream. I said, hey, Sarah, I got to tell you about this. And I started telling her about it. And I told her the story I just told you. And she said, that's pretty incredible. You know what that means, don't you? And I said, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll be honest, up to that point, I thought it meant don't eat pizza after 11, right? That's really what I thought it meant. And I said, why don't you tell me what you think it means? And then I'll tell you what I think it means. I don't want to take your view. And she said, I think it means that as a parent, you have a tendency, something's telling you that you have a tendency to force. You have a tendency to push too hard. And something's telling you you need to give more freedom for agency and choosing. And you probably need to take a step back or else you're going to push her to the very place you don't want her to go. And I was like, wow, that, that's exactly what I thought it meant. Right. And then she said something which I want to finish with because it changed my life. Has your spouse ever said something to you? It changed your life? She said, I think when it comes to parenting, you're going to have to learn it's not about force. It's about leading. It's not about forcing. It's about leading. And that's my hope and my prayer for all of you listening tonight, you parents, because I know it's difficult. I know it's stressful. I know your heart is in it. And I think the best thing we can do as parents is learn in creating a gospel centered home. It's not about forcing, it's about leading. And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.